All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to thank everybody in the room for joining us. Thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank everybody who is joining us virtually through YouTube. Welcome. And if you're on YouTube, please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we will address them at the end. My name is Jennifer Summers. I am the Outreach Specialist with the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife here at UW-Stevens Point. We are an extension organization within the College of Natural Resources, and you are here for the conclusion of our seminar series titled The Art of Waterbird and Wetland Management. So I need my clicker here. So this is the final seminar in this 7-seminar series. We had several other speakers that joined us that covered everything from decoy carving to management of wetlands in Wisconsin to federal refuge system. So all kinds of really interesting things in terms of, and all of these are related to how duck stamp funds provide habitat for wildlife, waterbirds in particular. So all of these recordings, with the exception of Pat Gregory, are available on our website. So you can go ahead and check that out if you want to see any of these recordings, if you weren't able to make it in person. And Pat Gregory's will be up soon, so just be patient, but you can find those online. I'd like to go through a couple of acknowledgments and thank the people who helped bring this series together. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the folks in the College of Natural Resources. So Wisconsin Center for Wildlife is part of the College of Natural Resources, but we have folks in the CNR office that were helpful in making this happen. So they help us with some promotions, and we use their YouTube channel for our live streams. So I'd like to thank the folks there for their assistance and cooperation in pulling this together. And secondly, I'd like to thank the Wisconsin Extension. As I mentioned, Wisconsin Center for Wildlife is a UW Extension organization, or at least partially, because our director is an extension specialist. And so thanks to those folks. And I'd also like to thank two of our wildlife faculty in particular, Ben Settinger, who is our waterfowl and wetland specialist. He helped identify speakers and help pull this series together, helped contact speakers and make this a reality, and helped with the budget as well too. So special thanks to Ben. And I'd also like to thank Marie Perkins, who's in the audience tonight. She is also a professor here at wildlife professor here at UW-Stevens Point, and she does work with shorebirds. And so I'd like to thank her for her help in pulling together this seminar series as well. She helped contact speakers, helped reach out to speakers and identify folks, and helped make this a reality. And finally, I'd like to go over this important acknowledgement that we do with our local tribal communities every time we have a public-facing event. So the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point exists upon land inhabited by the original indigenous people of this area, including the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the many other nations and groups that predate colonial borders. We acknowledge that with the colonization of North America, colonization, Native American people have been dispossessed of their lands and irreparably changed by the actions of individuals and institutions. We acknowledge our responsibility to understand and respond to those actions. In partnership with the Native American Center, we commit to working together to honor the past, be intentional in the present, and build our future with truth. Finally, without further ado, I would like to move forward and introduce our speaker today. Moment. So our speaker today is Rebekah Knight. Rebekah Knight is a wildlife artist, and she was the second place runner-up in the 2024 federal duck stamp competition. So her passion for painting animals and wildlife conservation has led her to become an accomplished wildlife artist. She won the junior duck stamp competition in 2006 when she was 15, and her art was featured on the Nevada State Duck Stamp, the National Duck Stamp Collector Society stamp, and she has placed second in the federal duck stamp contest twice. She received the Roger Tory Peterson Institute of Excellence in 2019, was a finalist in 2021 and 2024 for the David Shepard Wildlife Foundation Artist of the Year, and is a signature member of the Society of Animal Artists. She was featured in the Animal Planet documentary $1 Million Duck, which covers the federal duck stamp. If you haven't seen it, you should. It's really interesting. Locally, Rebekah's art has been included in the Lee Yawkey Woodson Art Museum's Birds and Art exhibition, which is a pretty prestigious juried art competition. Exhibit, Rebekah's art features wildlife from Alaska to Africa and anywhere in between, depicted in their natural habitats with stunning realism and detail. She currently lives in Deepwater, Missouri with her husband, where she creates her art and works part-time as a USPS rural mail carrier. So I would like to welcome our speaker, Rebekah Knight.
Hello. Thank you, guys. Thank you guys for coming to hear me talk about my experience with the duck stamp contest. In 2017, they had the federal duck stamp contest here on this campus, and I was able to attend that contest. So I've been here before, and so I'm just really glad to be here today to tell you guys about my experience with it. So I thought I would just start by kind of giving a brief overview about what the duck stamp is, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. But that is a picture of the very first federal duck stamp, drawn by J. Ding Darling. And that was issued in 1934 when the federal government passed the Migratory Bird Hunting Stamp Act, which required hunters to purchase a federal duck stamp as a part of their hunting license. And so 98 cents out of every dollar bought from stamps goes directly back into the purchase of wetland habitat through the wildlife refuge system. And so in 1949 is when they had the first contest, I believe, as a way of selecting the artwork that goes onto the stamp. And they've had that contest ever since. And as far as I know, it's the only federally run art competition in the U.S. And then in 1993, they started the kind of like the kids version of the federal duck stamp, which is the federal junior duck stamp. And that was started for the purpose of education, and it's open to kids K through 12. So that's kind of a very brief overview. And if you guys have any questions, just feel free to save your questions for the end, and I'll be happy to answer those. So as far as my background, I have been drawing animals since I was a little kid. And we grew up kind of out in the country. I'm from Missouri, by the way. And we grew up like out in the country, and I spent a lot of time like out in the woods, just exploring nature. And I was exposed to hunting at an early age. So I've always been drawing animals. I had tried drawing other things like landscapes and people and flowers and things like that, but I just kept coming back to animals. And I think it was just the variety of like textures and colors and personalities in all different kinds of animals that just kept me coming back to that. So when I was about 13, our family knew a local artist. Her name was Susan Harding, and she kind of helped the local kids enter the junior duck stamp contest, like the local 4-H kids. And I had heard about the junior duck stamp contest before, but I had never really known like what it was or known much about it. So when she kind of got wind of my talent, she invited me over, and she helped me to enter my first junior duck stamp entry. And that was when I was 13, and that was my first junior duck stamp entry from 2004. And so that year, I ended up placing first in my age category, and then, so that gave me like a confidence boost to enter again. And then I ended up, the same thing happened the following year. I got first place in my age category. And then the third year, by which time I was 15, my painting won first in my age category and then for the state of Missouri. And then it went on and ended up winning the National Junior Duck Stamp Contest. So the way and I'll go back one slide here. So that is my winning Junior Duck Stamp from 2006. And I wasn't married yet, obviously, so my last name was Nostov at the time. But the way the Junior Duck Stamp works is a little bit different from the federal, which I'll explain in a little bit. But with the junior, every state has a Junior Duck Stamp Contest, and the winner of every state goes on to compete for the National Junior Duck Stamp. So that was a eye-opening experience for me. I didn't realize how big of a deal it was until after I won, and then through that I learned about the federal contest. So after I won the junior, I ended up getting to do an internship with the duck stamp office, which was located in Arlington, Virginia at the time. And that was a really great experience. I made a lot of really valuable connections that I still have today through that. And I spent a summer doing that. I think I was like 17 or 18 years old at the time. And that was back when they had more people working in the duck stamp office. I think now they just have like 2 people working in there, but that was a really, really great experience for me. And then after that, I went on to college, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be around animals, and I wanted to maybe go into conservation, but then I also knew I had this talent for art too. So I ended up going to college with a major in graphic design, and after a couple of semesters, I realized that just wasn't really the path for me, because everything else in my life kind of kept pointing back to going into being an artist, like just a studio artist doing original paintings. So I decided that I didn't really need an expensive college degree to be a good artist. So I decided to quit college, and then I ended up getting a part-time job with the post office doing as a rural mail carrier, which I still do today. So, and it works out really great with my schedule. Right now I probably work only like 1 to 2 days on average. So when I'm not working at the post office, I'm doing my artwork. So, and then I got married, and my husband is a full-time mail carrier as well. So that kind of helps free up time for me to pursue my art more. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And so I still enter the federal, and it's like it kind of become almost like a seasonal feeling for me, kind of like when the seasons change, you can kind of feel it in the air, like when the holidays come around, you can kind of smell it in the air almost. And so that's kind of what it's like for me when I go to start my entry and start thinking about what I'm going to paint. But before I go into my process, I'll kind of touch over some of the basic rules. So if you go onto the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, there's a fairly lengthy document with the rules on it. And there's more rules in there than what I have listed here, but these are just kind of the very basic things to remember. So there are 5 species choices that you get to choose from each year, and those species change every year. They have different choices, so they kind of rotate through them. And then the image size has to be 7 by 10 inches, and it has to have a 1-inch white mat around the outside. So the paintings themselves, or they're not all paintings, they can be various mediums, but they're about this big. So they're not very big. And there's a $125 entry fee, and the deadline is always August 15th. And in that same rules document, there's also some guidelines that kind of explain some of the things that the judges are looking for. And just 3 of the main things. The first thing is they want a scene depicting live birds in their natural habitat. So they don't want like dead birds or hunting scenes or domestic birds or birds in captivity. It's got to be live bird in its natural habitat, and they generally want something that is realistic. And I would say the most important thing is that it has to be a design that's suitable when it's reduced down to the size of a stamp, which a stamp is like 1 3/4 inches big. And actually the judges at the contest have what are called reduction glasses, and it looks just like a magnifying glass, except it does the opposite. So when they hold it up to the entry, it reduces it down to the size of a stamp, so they can see what it would look like when it's small. So that's an important thing to consider. So you want your entry to be pretty simple. You want it to be quickly and easily recognizable. And you don't want your bird or your birds to be like sort of get lost when it gets reduced down in size. And then of course you want your anatomy and the biology part of things to be accurate, so you don't want, you know, a bird that's in winter plumage to be in an obviously summertime scene. So yeah, it's real important, like if you're entering and if it's your first time, super important to read all the fine print in the rules, because I've seen artists get disqualified, you know, because of some of the fine print that's in the rules. Another thing is they don't want any like writing or you can't sign your painting, because the judges aren't supposed to know who painted what. So, and it is a contest, so you might be wondering, like, is there a prize if you win? And there's actually no monetary prize for winning. What you get if you win is obviously your piece of work becomes the face of the duck stamp for the following year, which in itself is a huge honor and to me worth entering. But also, if you win, the duck stamp office will be working with you throughout the year. And so they'll be sending you to like various wildlife and waterfowl events, kind of like as a guest speaker. You'll sign a lot of prints, and you can potentially make a lot of money selling prints. So back in the day, like around the 80s and the 90s, when people bought a lot of prints, they say you could potentially make like up to $1 million just in print sales. But it's not quite like that anymore because people don't buy as many prints, but you can still make quite a lot off of print sales. So overall, it's very much worth entering and worth winning. So now I'll kind of go a little bit into my process. So the first thing I do is decide what species I'm going to paint. And I'm going to use 2022 as my example because I documented that year pretty well. But these were the species choices for 2022. And yeah, people ask me all the time, like, how do you choose which one you're going to do? And for me, it has everything to do with what photo reference I have available. So I take all of my own photo reference, and I prefer to get birds in the wild if I can. But sometimes there are some species that are really hard for me to get in the wild, like some sea ducks up off the coast of Alaska. With my gear and my resources, it's not always an option for me. So in a case like that, I'll go to like an aviary if they have them. That can be a good place to get up close photos. And they don't always look as good as birds in the wild, but those are just things I have to keep into consideration. But yeah, so on my computer, I have files or folders and folders full of waterfowl photos that I've taken, like thousands of photos, and they're organized by species. And so what I'll do is I'll look at the list that they have for that year, and I'll create a duck stamp folder for this year's contest. And then I'll go through all my photos and of those species, and I'll just set aside everything that jumps out to me that I think I could use for a good stamp entry. And so then I'll go into the duck stamp folder and then kind of narrow it down from there. So once I have a more manageable list of photos that I could work from, then I'll do little like thumbnail sketches like that. And they're about the same size as a stamp. So I'll just kind of do this to explore composition possibilities, whatever I think might look good on a stamp based on the photos that I have to work with. And so usually I'll get it down to a small handful of ideas. Most of the time I get it down to like 1 or 2 ideas. But in the case of 2022, I happen to have one photo that jumped out at me immediately, and I liked it better than anything else I had. So I ended up going with this photo of this Barrow's goldeneye. And this photo is completely untouched. It's uncropped. It's exactly how it looked off of my camera. And I photographed this bird in an aviary, and I just really liked the overall peaceful look that he has. I like that his foot's showing, and I thought that I could really push those purples in his head. And I just thought it was a really nice representation of that species that would make a nice stamp. A lot of times you'll see stamps that are like the drake and the hen together. That makes a great design, but I didn't have any hen photos that would work with this. And I thought that just doing the drake would make a nice stamp design in itself. So the only thing I was going to change was smooth out the background, like do kind of like an airbrushed look background, and then maybe put some weeds behind him. So that's a very classic duck stamp design. So once I get it down to my 1 or 2, sometimes 3 photos that I'll be using, then I'll put it in Photoshop. And I actually use a program on my iPad, or an app called Procreate. I use that instead of Photoshop because it's easier. I can use the pencil. But I used to do Photoshop for years. So I took the photo, and you can see that I flipped it around. And that's mainly because when I paint birds or ducks, it's a little easier for me to paint the feathers if the bird is moving from right to left, because the feathers kind of swoop this way. So it's like the motion of my hands is a little easier. Otherwise, it doesn't matter which direction they're facing. So I put it in on my iPad, and then I airbrushed the background and then just kind of scribbled some weeds in there to get a basic idea of what I wanted my design to look like. And that's all I need to do at that point. I don't spend a lot of time trying to make it exactly perfect, because I can make all those changes directly onto the painting. So like I wouldn't spend a whole bunch of time, I wouldn't spend a whole bunch of time trying to remove that stick in front of him. I just ignore that in the painting. So once I have everything, and it's just about getting the size and how much space I want the bird to take up. So once I have everything like ready to go, I'm ready to go ahead and start painting it, then I will draw it onto my board. And I blocked off the outer inch for the mat. So I use a 9x12 board, which is pretty much what most, if not all, the artists use. And then if you block off an inch around the outside, that makes the image exactly 7x10. So that's, at that point, I'm ready to start adding on the paint. And so the next thing I do is, in this case, I started with the background. I don't always start with the background. I paint in oils. So normally I start with my darkest darks first and then just kind of build from there. But in this case, I started with the background because it's a kind of a smooth gradient, and so which requires some long brush strokes sometimes. So I didn't want to like accidentally paint over things I'd already painted. So I just went over, did the background first, and then moving from back to front, basically, then I blocked in the weeds. And as far as reference for weeds, like I'll just go on Google image and I'll Google as many weeds as I can, or sometimes I'll go outside and like grab a handful of weeds if it's the right kind, and just kind of make them up based on that. But this is the block in stage, so I'm just blocking in the main colors, the main shadows. I'm not worrying about any kind of detail whatsoever. And then the next thing, I put in the reflection. And when I'm painting water especially, it's important for me to make sure that my paint stays wet while especially with water, because I want my edges to be smooth and I want to have soft edges, and I want that paint to be workable. So I try to do things like water in one sitting if I can. And then I finish the block in on the bird, so not much detail at all. And so I let this dry completely, and so at this stage I can look at it and determine whether or not I think it's going in the direction I want it to, or if I want to make any changes. So in this case, I was not very happy with the background because I thought it was just, everything just looks too brown, and the weeds kind of got lost because they're kind of the same color. So the second time I went over the background, I pushed the greens and the blues and added more of like kind of a reflection in the background. And I thought also that the greens would bring out the purples in his head more. And then so inevitably with an airbrush look like that, you're gonna go over things you've already painted. So I went over my weeds again, and then I also finished the reflection underneath him. And then, so the last thing I did, at least in this one, was I finished the bird. So the next slide is the finished painting. And that's always the fun part, doing like the iridescence and the feathers and like the eye and the little water droplets and things. That's my favorite part to do. So part of the reason I save that for the end is because it kind of keeps me motivated, because I'm just kind of like waiting to work on the fun parts. The block-in stage, I call it the ugly stage because to me it looks pretty ugly at first, but yeah, so that's the completed painting. That was my entry for 2006, and it placed 5th, I think. So not too bad, could be better, but could be worse. I'm pretty happy with 5th. I think it tied for 5th too. There were other paintings also that got 5th. So that's basically my process. And so once I get my painting done, I get it in the mail by August 15th. And usually it's on August 15th because that's just the way I do things. But it's always on the last day, right before the post office closes. But I get it in the mail, and then the actual contest takes place usually mid to late September. And the location changes. So they have the contest somewhere different in the US usually every year. During COVID, they had it virtually, so it was just live streamed, so I just watched it from home. But But I like to attend the judging if I can. It's always really fun to kind of make a trip and visit some new places. And I've made a lot of really valuable connections through just attending the contest. It seems like I meet somebody new every time that leads to something else. So I'll just kind of, some of you are probably familiar with how the judging works, but I'll kind of just go over that really quick. So at the judging, there are 5 judges, and nobody knows who the judges are until the day of the contest. And usually they like to have like a well-rounded panel of judges. So they'll have, you know, somebody who, 1 or 2 people who are artists. They'll have someone who is maybe an expert in conservation or philatelics, which means stamps, and maybe a waterfowl photographer. They have their own criteria for selecting judges. But, and then the contest takes place over 2 days and 3 rounds. So the first round is on the first day. And so what they do is they set up the judges at a table like you can see in the picture with dividers so they can't see who is voting what, with a big screen behind them displaying the painting or the entry that's being judged. And so the first round is called the in or the out round. And this is where they basically weed out the majority, or not the majority, but they like weed out the entries that they feel would not make a good duck stamp, which often is the majority. But that each judge has 2 cards, and one says in and one says out. So they have a volunteer take 1 piece at a time, and they'll just walk it and hold it in front of each judge for a few seconds or until the judge has gotten a good look at it. And then once they've all looked at the entry, they ask them to vote, and then the judge will vote in or out. And so a piece has to get 3 out of 5 ins to move on to the next round. Otherwise, it's voted out. So that's the first round on the first day. And there's usually somewhere around 200 to 230-ish entries on average, at least since I've been attending the contests. Last year there were 245 entries, so it can be a very long morning because they have to go through each one at a time. So after the first round, they allow each judge to go back and select up to 5 entries per judge that they can bring back. Because sometimes, you know, a judge will vote one in and they think it really deserves to be in, but it got voted out. Well, if they want to go bring that piece back, they can. So that's the first day. And the second day is rounds 2 and 3. And so the second round is basically the same situation, except it, instead of in or out cards, each judge has 5 cards numbered 1 through 5. And so they're going to give each entry a numbered score, and then that entry gets a total. So just like you see here, they will add that total up, and then that entry will get a total score. So that's the second round. And the third round, they take all the entries that have the top 5 scores, which can be more than 5 entries, but they take everything that have the top 5 scores and they repeat the process, except this time each judge has 3 cards numbered 3 through 5. So an entry can get a total score of anywhere between 15 and 25. And so at the end of round 3, they're looking for a clear first, second, and third place winner. But oftentimes there are ties, in which case they have to do a tiebreaker. And so in that case, they'll just have 1 or 2 volunteers hold the 1 or the 2 or sometimes 3 entries that are tied. They'll just like walk all 2 or 3 of them together so the judges can see them together. And then they'll basically repeat the process until they break the tie. So that's kind of basically how the judging works. The contest is always open to the public, and so normally they have all the paintings in like a main lobby or at the venue, and so that all the public can go look at all the entries when they're not being judged. There's a picture of me and Susan Harding that I was telling you about, my first art mentor. That's us just kind of looking at the paintings that are displayed, and I don't remember when or where that was, but that's just kind of what it's like at the contest. So it's always a lot of fun to be there as an artist, and especially when there's other artists there, because like I said, nobody knows who painted what, and us artists don't usually share with each other our entries. So it's fun when there are other artists there because we can kind of secretly like exchange our entry numbers and try to guess who painted what. And a lot of us have become pretty good at being able to tell who painted what just on the painting style. Some of them are instantly recognizable and some of them are a little tougher, but that's always a lot of fun trying to guess whose is whose. Sometimes the outcomes can be kind of shocking too after the contest. Here's a couple of entries that have won in the past. And the one on the left there of the swans was painted by Joe Hopman. So before I go on, I have to tell you about the Hopman brothers, and I'm sure many of you are familiar. They probably don't need any introduction, but they're three brothers. They're all artists, and they all enter the duck stamp contest. There's Joe, Jim, and Bob. Between the three of them, they have won 15 times now, I think. So they pretty much dominate the contest, which is, you know, understandable and rightly so because they have really figured out how to do the perfect duck stamp. And it just adds a whole extra level of competition to have them in the contest. And I also forgot to mention that one of the rules, if you win the duck stamp, you have to sit out for 3 years. The problem with the Hopmans is that there's 3 of them. So if one wins, or if 2 wins, yeah, they're not in for the next 3 years, but there's always going to be one in the contest that you have to compete against. So it's always nice to have a year where there's only one Hopman, but they're always there. So this year, when this painting was selected, Joe placed first, Bob placed second, and Jim placed third. So that's just a testament to how good they really are. That was a crazy year. I think that's the first time that's ever happened. But yeah, sometimes crazy things happen at this contest. But and then if you remember, like I mentioned earlier in the rules, how the judges after the first round, they can go back and select up to 5 entries each to bring back if it gets voted out. So believe it or not, Scott Storm's painting here on the right got voted out in the first round. So 3 out of those 5 judges thought that this painting did not deserve to even get a second glance. It wasn't good enough for a stamp for whatever reason, and everybody was pretty shocked by that because he's won before. And it got brought back, which is always nice because when your painting gets voted out and then brought back, that's great, but the chances of you winning at that point are pretty much nil because you already know that the majority of those judges at one point thought it didn't even deserve a chance. So, but it obviously ended up going on to win. So to my knowledge, that's the first time that has ever happened, for one to be brought back and then end up winning the contest. And then you'll also notice in that one that there's a decoy in the background. So that was, that year, 2020, they had a mandate that year that required artists to include a duck hunting element in their entry. And this was to celebrate our waterfowl hunting heritage was kind of the tagline for that, which I totally understand. Hunters are the main ones that buy the stamp, and I'm a hunter myself, so you know I fully support that, but it created some severe artistic limitations for us artists because not everybody is a duck hunter. So there was an issue with, you know, artists not having adequate reference or knowing what kind of reference to get. It's like if you don't hunt ducks, like how do you know what to put in there? But you know, they said you could include anything from dogs, duck calls, boats, decoys, like a blind somewhere in the background. But it made it very, very difficult for us to try to create a convincing scene with all of this extra stuff in there that also looked good on a stamp, because it's like hard enough to do that with just a bird. So that was very tough, but it made for some really interesting entries that year. The general public who were not aware of this rule, who were looking at the entries, everybody was like, why are all these duck calls floating around in the water? And there were like shotgun shells and things. Like the things people came up with too, that, you know, you could tell that they weren't duck hunters. It was like there were some very interesting entries that year. But Obviously, Scott Storm did a beautiful job on that entry. It made a great stamp, and I'm glad that he got brought back. So that's just a couple of interesting tidbits about those two stamps, and that's just two of them, and those are just things you would never know if you didn't know anything about the duck stamp contest. So it just adds an extra level of interest to the whole thing. And as I said, like, I mean, it can be, as an artist, it can be super nerve-wracking to have an entry in the contest, especially when I'm still in the contest. And it's like I can't even relax until I know, like, if I get voted out, it's almost nice because it's like, good, I can just relax and not be so nervous about, you know, I could still win. But I would say the most emotional one for me was in 2016. It was my first time placing second, and that's me and Susan holding my entry. That was in Philadelphia, and my entry was tied for first with Jim Hopman's 3 Flying Canada Geese. And I don't remember how many times they had to try to break the tie, but it felt like an eternity. And I was just freaking out the whole time. But I finally ended up placing second, and if I remember correctly, I placed second by 1 point. I don't remember what the scores were, but I think it was just 1 point. So it was so close. And the funny thing is that year, Jim Hopman won, I got second, and one of the other Hopman brothers got third. So I was like sandwiched between 2 Hopman paintings that year. And then just last year, I got second with my Merganser. This one, so in the picture of me standing with the paintings, the one with the blue ribbon, that's Adam Grimm's winning entry. And so at the end of the 3rd round, he was the clear winner. I knew I wasn't going to win at that point, but I was tied for second with the other painting there. And so I think it was on the 3rd or 4th attempt they finally broke the tie, and I ended up placing second. So I wasn't disappointed in any way. People ask me if I'm like super disappointed to get second, and I never am, because I never go into it expecting to win. To me, second is just it's a reminder to me that I could win if I just keep entering, because those top few entries, when they get down to the last round, any of them could be, you know, good enough to beat the stamp. It's just a lot of times it comes down to the judge's personal preference or something. But I know that my work has what it takes to win if I just keep entering, which I do to this day, and I don't plan on stopping entering. I used to do a lot of state stamp contests. Some states have state waterfowl and conservation stamp contests, and I won the Nevada one in 2013. But there are so many of those that I could easily spend all of my time doing stamp competitions when that's not quite the direction that my art that I want my art to go in. Because my art right now is focusing more on like the fine art side of things, so trying to get into more like museum shows, like Birds and Art was a big one for me, and other art shows and things like that, where it's more, the art is based more, there's more creativity in the art versus creating something that is designed to fit something, like the duck stamp. But I still am going to do the federal because I've just been involved with it so long, and I've made so many great connections, and it's done so much for me, and I also think it's such a great program to be involved in. I know a lot of artists, and some of them who have won the contest who no longer enter. Some of that's because they've become super successful and they just don't need to enter again. They don't need to win again. They're on to bigger and better things. Some artists I know who are really, really good don't enter anymore because they've become tired of being let down every year after pouring their heart and soul into an entry only to be shot down year after year. You know, it can wear on you as an artist after a while. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, it's hard for me too sometimes, you know, especially if I get voted out in the first round, which has happened plenty of times. But I just go into it never expecting to win. I do it because I love the contest and I love the connections and the friends I've made through the contest. It's just the whole experience for me is the reason I do it. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, where are we on time? Okay, okay. I probably won't fill the next 20 minutes, but that's pretty much my experience overall with the contest and attending the contest. I also like to try to bring my fine art skills that I've learned outside of the duck stamp into this contest, to try to create a piece of work that's suitable for a stamp, but that is also a good piece of fine art. And then again, just the honor of being part of such a great program is reason enough for me to be involved with it. I want to bring up, some of you may be familiar with or have seen this film, $1 Million Duck. This came out in 2016. It aired on Animal Planet, and it was done by Brian Davis, who is on the far left in the picture. And it's just a documentary that kind of goes over, it kind of follows a handful of us artists through our process of being like an artist in the duck stamp contest, all the way from getting our reference photos to the day of the contest. And it's really good. It's suspenseful, and it's funny, and it's very educational, and it's very well put together. It's not boring at all. It's a great film, and I had a blast being a part of that. It was a lot of fun. So you have Brian Davis on the far left, and then the guy in the green suit, that is Rob McBroom. He is an artist, and he always enters like really like abstract, not realistic at all entries to the contest, and it's nothing like what the judges are looking for, and he knows that, but he faithfully enters every year, and he's been entering ever since I've been around, like entering the duck stamp. So it just adds an extra level of interest to the whole thing. And then next to him in the red scarf is Marty Smith. He is the author of the book called The Wild Duck Chase. It is the book that the film is inspired by, and it's a really great read. Highly recommend that if you want like a really in-depth story. And then in the middle, in the black suit, that's Adam Grimm. He's the one that beat me last year. He's won 3 times now. And there's myself, and then there's Tim Taylor in the gray sweater. He and Adam Grimm are really good friends, and Tim is an artist. And he and Rob McBroom have a feud going on in the film, which is really great. And then on the far end is Dee Dee Murray. She's an artist, and she actually taught her blind dog how to paint. So that's pretty remarkable. That's all in the film. So it's really good. I think you can find this on Amazon. Should be able to. Probably have to rent or buy it. And then there's just some past entries that I've done, so you can look at those. How much time do we have? A few minutes?
We want to leave about 10 minutes for questions, so you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, yeah. So these 2 entries on the bottom, you can see that this one has a decoy in it and that one has a boat in the background. So those are obviously for those years when I had to include the hunting element. The one on the far bottom right, that one, kind of an interesting story with that. So when I did that entry, I wanted to do a king eider because I love eiders and sea ducks. They're like my favorite, and I had a decent photo of one, but I'm like, what am I going to do for a hunting element? What am I going to put in there? So I did a little bit of research, but I've never been hunting for sea ducks or eiders, so I didn't really know what kind of like hunting element to put. So I actually reached out to some friends that I knew who had hunted eiders or guided for them. And somebody recommended to me to put the boat you see, which is called a TBD boat, which stands for the duck boat. That's what they're called. And so very original. But those boats are built, I think, somewhere on the East Coast somewhere. So anyways, that's what I put in there. And that island that you see like on the very end is a very specific island. I think it's called Otter Island or something off of St. Paul Island off the coast of Alaska. So that's basically where most people go to hunt eiders, king eiders specifically. So that's the entry I did. So after that contest, I posted my entry on Facebook, and then there was a hunting guide that I was already friends with for some reason, and he saw my entry, and he's like, he asked if I would be interested in like trading for a stay at his lodge on Adak Island, Alaska, out on the Aleutian Chain, which I'd always wanted to go to. So I was like, yeah, I would definitely be interested in that. So it turns out that he told me that there's only like one of those TDB boats out there off of St. Paul Island, and it's one of my guides. And so he really wanted this painting, and so I took him up on that, and I ended up going out to Adak Island on a trade for this painting. And that was just another, like, one of many connections that I've made through this contest, and part of the reason why I'm still involved. It's just done so much for me as an artist. But I just wanted to throw in that extra little story. But yeah, that's pretty much basically my experience. I would encourage you guys, if any of you are artists or like to draw, definitely give it a shot. The contest can always use new talent, and I love seeing more numbers every year. If you're not an artist, definitely buy a duck stamp, because you know what that does. It's like the simplest thing you could do, but also so effective. And then if you have or know a kid in your life that's between K through 12 that likes to draw, I would definitely get them involved in the junior, because that does so much for them. And I wouldn't even be up here talking about it if I had never entered the junior. So I would definitely encourage that. Otherwise, yeah, you can find all this, or the info on the rules and everything on US Fish and Wildlife website. And then if you want to see more of my work, I have a website, RebekahKnight.com. But I hope you found this interesting, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
So we are going to start. So if there's no questions online, and then Kip, just raise your hand if any questions do come online. You can type in there, remind folks that they can ask questions, and then we'll take questions from the room.
Yes.
So when you buy the physical stamp, there's actually the stamp aspect as well as the artwork, like on the background of like the paper you buy. How does that get decided? Is that up to the artist to kind of design after the fact? Or
Do you mean?
Process?
Yeah, do you mean like when you buy the dollar bill size one and there's extra artwork? Yeah, so if you win, you have to do what's called the companion piece. And so you have to do like a separate painting for it with intentions of putting that on that part of the stamp. So yeah, they will commission you to do that if you win. Yes?
What are some things that you try to keep in mind when you're like balancing composition versus realism in a piece? What aspects are you drawn towards that you would like to do that might not be realistic to look at the end? Like what the judges would like to see versus those realistic elements? Because I know you said you were starting to major in graphic design, especially from like a design standpoint.
So what are you asking, like about like my composition versus keeping it realistic, or like?
Yeah, like if there's certain ways that you would want the composition to be that wouldn't necessarily be realistic, like how do you balance that?
I wouldn't.
What are some things that you run into?
Right. I wouldn't say that any of my compositions would have anything unrealistic about them. There have been paintings I have done outside of the duck stamp contest that where I would maybe push things more, but it's just for fine art. It's not like I'm not trying to fit something. So I probably wouldn't do anything like that in the duck stamp. So in the duck stamp, I just try to keep everything realistic, but I also just keep in mind it's less about artistic composition and more about how suitable it is for the stamp. So the whole artistic composition thing kind of comes secondary to that, if that makes sense. But I still try to bring in fine art skills that I've used because I want it to be also a piece of fine art too. So if there's an option or a way for me to make it really creative and not just, a typical duck stamp, then I'll do that. And so some of my entries have been more creative than others, but sometimes I don't always have that option. So a lot of it has to do with like my photo reference too. So it's just different every time, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Are there any like specific elements that you like including for that sort of purpose? I guess. Like you mentioned the weeds, and a lot of them have stuff on the sides, like the mountains on the sides.
Yeah.
The image with like the duck facing the other way from the weeds.
Yeah.
Is that like a common theme that?
Yeah, so basically what I'm trying to do, and what you see a lot in duck stamp entries, is obviously you want the duck to be the main focus and be like You want it to be like the best representation of that species. But you also, I try to include some habitat elements too, because it's more than just about the bird, it's about the habitat too that they're in. So I kind of want the habitat to like match this bird. It's part of their identity is where they live. And so like in the Harlequin, I included mountains that kind of looks like Adak Island. And a lot of it, you know, has to do with like my personal feelings about things too. So that's why I really love doing the sea ducks. But, you know, as far as things like weeds, I just place those somewhere where it helps the composition. I don't want it to be anywhere weird or divide the picture in any weird sections. You know, I want something that's going to lead the eye kind of around. Just basic, kind of goes back to basic composition guidelines. And I use my other elements like weeds or horizons, clouds, backgrounds, flying birds, all that stuff. I just use those in your basic composition guidelines, if that makes sense. Okay. Anyone else? Yep.
I have like zero artistic ability, so I apologize if this is a great
It's okay.
But like, I feel like with the first duck that you showed in the beginning, how you just kind of cropped it out, is it hard for you to like make an interactive like background, like the birds?
Yeah. In fact, I can go back so we can, just so that I also know which one you're talking about. But it's like my 2006 entry. So you mean like taking from, oh, is it not going to go if I click? I just have to go back this way.
Technical problems.
Uh-oh. Do I need to click the little symbol,
You might
you
need to,
think?
yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
I just have to be gentle with it and click it kind of slowly. Anyways, I don't know if I'll be able to get back to that. Oh. Okay, go back one more here. There, so are you talking about this one? And then taking the background out? Okay, repeat your question.
Is it hard for you to like create like an interactive background? Like in some you had like
Right.
flying birds and stuff
Right.
to fit in with.
Yeah, okay, I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good question. It is definitely tougher to do that, and that's something I was also going to bring up that I kind of forgot to talk about in my process, but some of my entries, not all my entries have a very simple background like that. Some of them have like the full horizon and trees and other flying birds and stuff. It's just being slow, sorry guys. But those are tougher when especially in the stage when I'm using reference photos, because the important thing for me, if I'm using other elements like trees, flying birds, if there's like a specific rock I want it to be standing on that's not in the photo it's in, then I have to consider the light. That's the number one thing. So every element that I'm using from other photos has to have matching light, and so that's kind of a challenge sometimes because it seems easy. You can go take pictures of rocks and trees and whatever, but you have to get it in the same light. So yeah, it's harder in that regard, I would say, is just trying to get matching light. And sometimes I can make it up, but it's tough to make things up. It's like the more I make stuff up without looking at a reference photo, the more it's going to look made up. I don't know why it went away. I must have. Okay, anyways, I hope that answered your question.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, figure it out. I'll go back to my last slide there. Any other questions? Okay, you first.
Have you decided what species you're going to paint this year?
I have ideas. So the species, I'm probably going to not remember all these right now, but there's cinnamon teal, bufflehead, wood duck, gadwall. What'd you say, reddy duck? Yeah. Okay, so 3 of those I like. I have pretty good photos of 1. Now, if I do know exactly what I'm going to do, I'm probably not going to say it right now because, again, we try to keep our entries, we don't want anyone to know what we're painting. But I have decent photos of 1 of those. And then, but the one that I want, I don't have great photos. So I need to go get those photos somehow. So, and my window of time is pretty much until like the end of April, because then they're gone and I won't be able to get them in the wild or even in aviaries really. So I have to get photos pretty soon. Otherwise, I'll probably use the decent photos of the one I have, but yeah. And then you had a question?
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess speaking of lighting, like,
Mhm.
how much do you, like, use the reference photo directly, and, like, how much do you kind of push to lighting so there's, like, more contrast? Or
Right.
lighting?
Yeah, I usually get everything in my Photoshop mock-up the way I want it to look exactly as close as I can. So I will use like Photoshop to adjust light and, you know, push things back by fading things out and all that stuff. I'll do all that on Photoshop until I get it as close as I can to how I want it to look. And then if I get to where I'm perfectly happy with that, then I'll just paint exactly what I'm looking at. But sometimes, you know, you can't do everything in Photoshop, or like, maybe I'm just lazy, because you probably can, but I don't put like a ton of effort into that if I know I can just do it straight onto the painting. But normally I make those adjustments in Photoshop and then I go from there. So, yes.
How often do you travel and how far are you willing to travel for photos?
Oh, well, I've been to Alaska a bunch of times, and I mean, for the duck stamp specifically, normally I have already some photos I could use, but I would, if I know for sure that I could get photos of a king eider or spectacled eider or whatever I want to paint, if I know for sure that I can get that in Alaska, I will go to Alaska to get that. But that's kind of hard for me to do. So sometimes people will, I know some people who have some resources where I can do things like that, but if it's not a guarantee, I'm not going to go to like too much effort for something that I might get. So it really just depends on how guaranteed I would be to get those photos. But anyone else? Yes?
Have you learned a lot about duck behavior, like how ducks work or their
Yeah.
biology through this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, tons. More than I ever thought I would. Even ever since the junior duck stamp. Because my first art mentor, she knows a lot about ducks too. She actually used to carve decoys too, so she's very knowledgeable and she taught me a lot about that. So yeah, I've learned a ton about waterfowl. And you had a question?
Yeah, you may have mentioned this. Is it the same judges every year?
Nope.
Do they repeat ever?
Not usually. There may have been some time in the past, but no, not, usually they don't have the
I was
same.
just curious if there was like a specific judge you had a history with where
No.
they, like, for whatever reason, just the way that you do
Oh,
it.
some artists have a beef with the judges afterwards, because when the contest is over, you can talk to the judges. Before the contest, they're not allowed to talk to anybody. They'll be wandering around looking at the entries, but they're not allowed to talk to anyone. But after the contest, you can go up to them and ask, like, hey, why did you vote my painting this way? And they'll usually tell you. But I've seen some people get into some altercations with some of the judges. And did somebody over here have one? Okay, I thought I saw a hand. Yes.
How do they choose the 5 different species each year?
Yeah, I know that I've asked them this before, and I just can't remember. But I think that what they keep into consideration is when was the last time the species was on the stamp, so that one might be due to be, in the list. And then also part of it might be have to do with like popularity. They obviously, want popular species too. But I'm not really sure exactly. There might be a more like official answer to that, but I don't know.
So maybe time for one more?
Okay.
Apologies if you've already said something about this, but in terms of your like final piece,
Mhm.
is there kind of an average amount of time you end up spending on that
Yep.
final product aside from all the preliminary sketches?
Yeah, so you mean like how long does it take me to do my entry, basically, like the painting part?
Yeah, like you're working with the drawing.
Right. So I usually start my entry sometime in mid-July, give myself about a month to finish my entry and get it in the mail. I used to start a lot sooner than that because I used to take a lot longer to paint, but I've gotten a lot faster. So, and I don't work every day, all day. I just work like when I can, when I'm at home. So, but if I were to take all the days that I actually work on my painting and like cram them together, it's probably about a week's worth of work, 1 to 2 weeks, depending on, the complexity of the painting and everything. So, is that it?
So,
any additional questions, Rebecca will move to the lobby and you can ask those questions there, but we're going to wrap up in